couple things to highlight here. We're going to introduce Riley Jenkins, who's our TAC chair, to lead the engineering panel. He's an SRE, senior SRE at Domo, has been in the FinOps community for a long time, has been a tireless supporter of the organization, and has been involved in just a ton of programs over the years. So Riley, thank you for all the work. So yeah, would love to get you to introduce the panel. And as a placeholder for later as well, I want to put in the plug. The Technical Advisory Council has 5 or 6 new seats that seats are turning over, people who are going past term. So we're going to be doing elections for those. So if you're interested in getting more involved, and after hearing this, we're going to share some information on how to do that as well. So Riley, with that, can you hear me? Over to you.
I'm here.
Perfect.
Yep. All right, just to give you guys a quick, I'm super excited to talk about engineering and FinOps because that's my life and has been for going on almost 10 years now. To give you some background of kind of how I approach things, the FinOps practice at Domo is an embedded practice within the SRE group. Done that purposely and kind of molded it over time. But because we're SREs, we understand how our systems work. We speak with the engineers. We're fighting in the trenches to keep things scalable, performant. And then also, as part of that, we also look at costs and really try to make it so that the leap to talk about FinOps and talk about costs is something that's there doesn't need to be a huge amount of education for an engineer to understand that, because we curate data that comes right alongside with their usage. And really what it comes down to for me is a lot of the time it comes down to a trusted relationship between the teams. We talk about risk, not from the perspective of coming from an outside group, from an inside group that also doesn't want to be woken up in the middle of the night for something that's gone wrong. And so we communicate it from that perspective. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So I think a lot about the future, and even a couple days ago, I was getting frustrated that a lot of times there's lots of tools to build stuff in the cloud. There's lots of tools to really ramp up and scale up a bunch of machines and do lots of cool infrastructure code things. But there's not a lot of tooling that's very well integrated that allows you to do the same thing for cost projection or A/B between different options to see, okay, if I choose this instance type. So we've been kind of focusing, how do we do that? We also, along with that, we want to do things that make it so that it's very easy for us to understand unit cost metrics. So that'd be things like, hey, there's this feature, it happens X number of times and it costs this much. Doing that sort of thing at a much lower level would make it so that me personally and our workloads would make it easier for us to communicate how much it costs per unit of work. A lot of times what I find is that when an engineer, especially an engineer that comes new, is not really used to how we do cost management, we have to do a lot of education. And I don't know if you've ever ever talked to an engineer about CapEx versus OpEx and watch their eyes roll up back into the back of their head and they just don't care. That's part of it. We kind of, sometimes I think that we need to make sure that we're level setting before we talk about cost opportunities and cost optimization, because that helps everyone communicate and speak the same language. And then a lot of times what we focus on is, hey, shepherding, saying, don't spend $1 to save 10 cents, but if you can spend 10 cents and save $200, how do we highlight those things in not analyze everything manually, but in an automated way, be able to circle those so that engineering teams can pick them up and run with them without us having to constantly shepherd initiatives to find those. Those are kind of the things that I think are in our future, and it's going to be really exciting to see, especially what the FinOps Foundation can come up with, because there's a lot of thought leadership here. There's a lot of experience. And I feel like there's a lot of contribution that can be made to help the organization and all of our practitioners work on tooling and approaches to highlight some of these areas.
Right. I love that idea of, how do you get it to them easily and quickly, right? So they don't have to get out of their flow. This is that concept of putting that FinOps data right into the path of engineering, and putting it into their workflows is so critical. All
right. So we're super excited today to have this engineering panel. So I will probably answer one question because I'm the MC, so I get to answer at least one, right? So super excited to have everybody here. Shahnawaz Khan, you guys had an introduction from him from HCL. Jacqui Wilson from Old Mutual. Rui Barbosa, and sorry if I'm not good at names, from Farfetch. Wier from Target, who's also a member of our TAC. And then Sanjna Srivatsa, who is from VMware. So welcome. So we're going to jump right into some of the questions, and I love these questions. So I'm super excited. Shahnawaz, let's start with you. You know, engineering is like if you're an engineer, you're always balancing priorities. You're always being told what the priorities are. That priority is a big part of the everyday work of an engineer. As an engineer, how do you balance all those priorities, and where does cost come into that list? How do you balance that?
So, this is an interesting question for me, and I would surely try to give an honest response to this question. To build a secure, high-performing, resilient, and efficient infrastructure and deploying it through automation tools to attain speed and then perfection has always been a priority for an engineering team. But since the inception of the concept of well-architected framework by the public cloud providers, the benchmarks have changed. And cost optimization is now one of the pillars of designing and running workloads in the cloud, along with others such as security, efficiency, and reliability. So this has been adopted by all the 4 major cloud providers, including AWS, Azure, OCI, and then GCP. So avoiding unnecessary cost, controlling allocated budgets, restraining from over-provisioning of resources. So all this now defines how well an architecture aligns with cloud best practices. So it has been evident that when it comes to cost optimization, operation team takes this as a periodic exercise and focuses more on the low-hanging fruits, such as storage lifecycle management and tracing the idle resources, or sometimes opting for auto-scaling to save costs when systems are not in use, where the application supports. But with the introduction of FinOps framework within our team, we have observed a cultural change. So the team has started analyzing the deployed resources in day-to-day operations based on the spend. We have the tools deployed. We work with the native tools, as well as third-party tools, using low-cost instances or choosing spot instances for non-production or stateless resources, sometimes scheduling to turn off the resources in non-business hours, or following recommendations for reservations, opting for saving plans or committed usage discounts at organizational level have become a general practice within our team now. So the engineering-led leads now keep an eye on budgets. They set alarms and get notifications. Automated notifications have been set to notify about the breach much earlier before it surpasses the allocated funds. The accountabilities are being set, and thus I could conclude that cost is an equal priority for us now, and I can anticipate that sooner or later cost savings will be part of our key responsibility area.
Awesome. Kim, how do you view priorities and the balancing of them?
Yeah, so at Target we take a product lens. We do all of our work through a product lens. So priorities are important, and everybody always has too much work on their plate. So when you're working in a product model, you work to understand what is most important to your customer and what's going to deliver the most value, and prioritize that work accordingly. So that's how we do it at Target.
Okay.
Hey, Kim, can I ask, when you say it's a product model, how are you defining that as different than other FinOps models? What makes it a product model for you?
So Target in general develops all of our applications using a product model. So it's the product, and we try to understand who our customer is, and we develop our applications with that lens. And even within efficiency engineering, my team, we've taken the approach of efficiency engineering as a product and are developing our tools and our solutions with that lens of an engineer persona and a leader persona. And so we really are asking our customer, the engineer, what is it that you would like to see? Sometimes engineers don't really want to understand or want to see what their cost is or how they're utilizing. They just want to build new features and to, fix things when they're broken. So it's kind of a balance of what do you want and what do you need? So really driving that development through a product lens.
Right. I mean, what is your take on, especially like the managing side of engineering leadership and priorities?
What is my take on managing and priorities? So I really partner right alongside of our product manager to understand what the vision is, help drive the vision, help create the vision. And then really my role is to make sure that my team who's developing that product knows what the priorities are and are, have the skills that they need, have the development path that they need in order to be delivering that product and that tool that our company needs.
Right. So a question, just real quick, Kim. I see, friction is, friction happens everywhere in getting things done. But what are some specific pieces, like frictions, that prevent engineers from getting insights and making the right decisions? Is that mostly a data problem? Is it a tooling problem? Like, what do you do to reduce that friction so they can see and change?
So I think to me, the biggest friction is, so if I put on the lens of our customer, that customer hat, the biggest piece of friction is they just have an overwhelming amount of responsibilities. They need to deliver new features. They need to, do their break fixes. They need to do tech debt. They need to balance efficiency. They need to be performant. And so how does that engineer know what to do and what is the priority? One thing that we're working towards at Target is trying to present a perspective of what are all the priorities, what are all of the pieces to the puzzle, so that it's easier. If you just had a dashboard that said your performance is green, your efficiency is green, your tech debt is yellow, then you would know, oh, I should go check out what that tech debt opportunity is. So today, that's a big piece of friction at Target, and that's what we're trying to drive towards, is to pull all of those different pieces of the service management puzzle together.
Okay. So Rui Barbosa, can we get your perspective on kind of the dashboarding and the tools? I know that's something that you focused on.
Sorry, are you talking with me? My name is Rui. Yeah,
Rui.
Okay.
There we go.
Sorry.
Rui.
Okay, Rui. Yeah. Can you please repeat the question?
So I mean, there's this element of getting information in front of engineers, and really, it's kind of I see it as, we want them to have data, but we don't want to make it so hard that they have to have a degree in like the CUR or in a billing report somewhere to make a decision and make a change. What have you seen has been helpful as far as maybe leadership or tooling to help them, achieve a FinOps good practice?
I'm going to give an example that what we do at Farfetch. Okay, so we do not contact directly the engineers at Farfetch. Okay, because they are always overwhelmed and they don't have the time, as you all know. Okay, instead we contact the engineering managers. Okay, we let them have the knowledge or the opportunity of the cost saving that we are presenting, okay, to them, and they will decide with the team, okay, looking for the roadmap from the team, okay, and see if they can fit that cost saving opportunity into their roadmap, okay. So they do a balance between the value of the roadmap and the value of the cost saving opportunity. Okay.
Awesome. So Jacqui, I want to get your perspective. There's been this shift in culture with costs and efficient engineering, especially with moving to the cloud or adopting the cloud. What have you seen as far as a cultural shift? What are some examples that you've noticed?
Yeah, thanks. I think in my company, Old Mutual, we've definitely had that big culture shift in the last 2-3 years. So we're going through a massive migration exercise. We're almost coming to the end. So we'll be off premise and running fully in the cloud, which is an exciting period in our history. And through this change, there's been a big shift in the engineering culture. And I call it the DNA of the engineers. Really starting to talk to them and make them understand around the requirements of them when they're building, that they cannot continue just building without thinking about the cost of what they've built. And I think some of the people earlier spoke about CapEx and OpEx, really trying to get them to understand what it means to write a line of code that actually has a rand, or in the case of dollars, at the end, with compute run times. So the shift that we've been looking at over the last 2-3 years is moving predominantly from an engineering culture of resiliency, uptime, avoiding downtime. Your KPIs was all about that. Have you got monitoring in place? Have you got alarms going off at 2 a.m. in the morning, waking somebody up? There was always this culture of, the service you run must be optimally, and it was mostly around uptime and downtime. A little bit of disaster recovery and planning, but very little was put on the engineer's shoulders around managing costs. So this culture shift now is really putting all this data in front of the engineers and showing them their line of code, showing them how much it's costing, and also we've spoken a bit about it now as well around the potential wastage, and driving those out. And the culture shift has been to get the engineers to start taking responsibility, which is awesome for us, and not so much the leaders for us. We're trying to flatten that structure out. So we bring in the collaboration that the lowest level of importance in the old hierarchy is actually turned upside down. And the highest level of importance and direction is now given by the engineering team. They own it, they run it, they manage it, they can control it. So that's the culture shift we're starting to see appear in our company.
Awesome. I think a lot of times I'm kind of, sometimes I sit on opposite sides of my own desk and say, sometimes I'm operating as the FinOps guy, and sometimes I'm operating as an engineer that owns a production system. But I think a lot of times that, when somebody comes to an engineer and says, hey, there's this cost opportunity, even when it's happened to me in my own work, I think a lot of times it comes down to the communication of risk and knowledge of what they're actually asking for. A lot of times, if I'm asked by finance, hey, we need to, hey, can you save 10%? Half of my brain's like, you don't know what you're asking. Like that you can't just magically pull 10% out of thin air. There's cost investment that has to happen, whether it's time, upfront. That's something that I think about a lot, just because when, especially as a FinOps kind of leader, I want to make sure that I communicate to a team that there's something that is possible, and also know the risks, or have an idea of what the risks are of what I'm asking to do before I do it. That way I'm equipped and know kind of what pushback or what direction the team is going to kind of fall on, because you definitely don't want that. Well, this is just like the finance people asking me to do magic. Magic isn't a thing. I have to engineer it, right? Kim, what's your experience with when efficiency opportunities are mentioned to engineers? Like, how's that usually gone at Target?
Yeah. So we, in addition to building our own tools, and Riley, just like you, we sit on the side, we are developing our tools, and then we actually have to be efficient in our infrastructure consumption as well. So we are that dual-sided person, just like you. But one so we build tools, but we also have a team of strong engineers, kind of like you might think of an SRE team, but more of efficiency engineering consultant. So they really look at the data and understand where the top efficiency opportunities are. And then we go and we actually partner with the application team that has that biggest opportunity. We're still maturing in our FinOps practice, so we're just tackling the big issues right now. So what we do is we take that data, and it's all data driven. We take the data, we go and talk to the application team, and we talk about how can we optimize? Is there a way that you can configure auto scale? Is your auto scaling configured correctly? What changes can you make? And then sometimes the opportunities aren't as easy to solve. We have some situation where we have persistent storage and they're not able to leverage auto scaling and things like that. So that consulting actually can get into more of an engagement where we start to figure out, how do you solve that problem? Are there different technologies that you can use? And that's where you get more into the engineering side. So far, the teams that we've partnered with haven't been, they don't get their hackles up. They appreciate the partnership. I think they appreciate the data-driven approach. And so they've been welcoming of our data and our input and our partnership.
Great. Sanjna, I want to get your perspective. I've heard a lot, and I've even been told it and gotten a little frustrated. Engineers don't care about costs. To do certain things that they've been asked to as far as cost optimizations. What considerations that you're responsible for and the finance folks don't care about? Why is there a gap between care and the cost optimization?
Yeah, sure. So in my experience, I want to start off with the difference in the engineering and finance persona that I've seen. Engineers tend to have plans laid out for at least a quarter, if not two. And finance tend to focus on tasks at hand. Most of the time, they tend to focus on the present. It is true that engineers will not always execute and take action on recommendations that come to them. But the reason I don't think is that they don't necessarily care about cost. I know that the situation is today that they don't have cost as a constraint, but I personally, in my opinion, I've seen that it's not that they don't care about cost. I think engineers are more often than not very excited about the fact that they can go boast about the fact that they saved X amount to their team or to their engineering manager, that they saved this much, because that's not something that always gets surfaced to them. That's not something that they're always able to tell that, hey, the work that I did saved this much, or the work that I did brought in this much money to the company. So I think they're always a little excited by that opportunity to have that feather on their cap. But I don't think it's the fact that they don't care about cost, but it could be that they have trouble identifying what is the actual value of each recommendation brought to them by the team. It's not just in a vacuum, because they have to weigh it out against the value of delivering features, right? And this can be incredibly hard to do. They always have to choose between two ways to spend their time, and it can be really hard, first of all, identifying the value of each recommendation we take to them, and then even basing it off of the value that they're delivering in features, because they might not always be easily tangible. So something that we do at VMware, me being a data scientist, we have like a layer of logic. I don't want to say ML or AI, but it is ML. It is a layer of logic in the middle, which kind of sifts through all the hundreds and thousands of recommendations we have for people, and we prioritize them in terms of actionability, which is the most relevant for a particular team or product, and we kind of surface them to a particular team so that we get highest rate of action.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed is that there's this big arc of ownership between engineering and finance. There's, if you think about it, like, finance, if the path is finance tells engineer to do something, I've almost never seen that work. Jacqui, want to get your perspective on why maybe there's a little bit of friction there between when finance says something and engineering maybe just blinks at them and says, what are you asking?
Yeah, thanks, Riley. So I agree with Sanjna. I mean, the one thing that she said that stood out to me that's similar in our organization is that budget planning cycle, you know, where your finance people are always looking at quarterly spends and are we on forecast, you know, so the terminology again is different. They're worried about depreciating and amortized costs, and your developers are thinking about runtime and steady run rates. So I think that the terminology is a big stumbling block in our culture around trying to get us on the same page and trying to understand that if we're changing levers right now, you know, finance might not see that immediate improvement on the general ledgers, and that's where they want to, you know, feel that they are in control of the money being spent side of things. And I don't think it's finance not appreciating the effort involved of an engineer in root causing, right? And again, the rows of data that we can get. I mean, we all need to be data scientists almost to go through, you know, some of the daily stats and reports that come out and try and find those little anomalies and low-hanging fruit. So I think it's the conversation again around creating those playbooks is something else that we're trying to really improve on, around finding those anomalies and building up playbooks that when we have the conversation with maybe a different team in 3 weeks' time, we're not reinventing the wheel. You know, you pull out the playbook and you say, we've had this scenario before. This is what we did. This is how we achieved the outcomes. And we saw the results maybe in Q2 only, or next month, or immediately. So then that for us, that's a key thing is around the terminology and the distinction between immediate benefits versus, you know, we'll make the change now and we'll see it soon. Just be calm and patient. It's arriving soon.
Yeah, so I think about the two relationships. You know, we have to mesh those. I really like the concept of making sure that we're using the same terminology and the same, you know, speaking the same language. Really, in your experience, are there other teams that we also need to bring into the umbrella of making sure that we're all speaking the same language and shooting towards the same goal?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, what we do is we get lots of community forums up and running just to get those value chains established within the culture of. So it's not always just IT, but it's also our business. Our partners in business are starting to come to the table and have those same conversations. So in the past, you know, they were the ones that were maybe holding the purse strings for IT spend, and IT always spends too much. You know, IT people are cowboys. We're always overspending. You know, there must be some savings. Right. Whereas now we're coming to the table and we're opening the purse and saying, look how much we're spending. You know, where don't you want the spend? And we spoke earlier about the value add of that of the spend. How do we equate that? So now we can actually, you know, we're not hiding anything. IT is not hiding any strange story around what we're spending our money on. It's all open books now suddenly. You know, it's a very different culture. And I think that two-way conversation now with sharing the data, challenging us each other, but our business within the value chain is another area that we're bringing to the table to take part in those conversations.
Right. So there's a big a theme that's been ongoing is moving towards the cloud. Dealing with systems that maybe didn't originate cloud native. Shahnawaz, what's the greatest challenge there in a scenario where you're maybe adopting the cloud or moving?
Yeah, so I'll be candid in replying this. A lot of people are still running a legacy system over the cloud as well, and may not like my response, but still, we have seen that the system migrated from on-premises or from a private legacy cloud are neither performance efficient, nor they are very cost efficient. And even we have observed that most of the systems lying on-prem are over-provisioned, and thus when they are migrated to cloud as is, or with the lift or shift approach, in many cases, the same amount of resources are provisioned to the applications that were on-prem. So operations always have been a challenge for these kinds of workloads due to their non-supportive build for modern cloud management platforms. And even these systems, performance or cost optimization is also not easy in such cases. So modernization of these workloads and switching to cloud native services seems to be a solution. But again, due to the complexities and interdependencies between the applications, and then huge redevelopment efforts and cost and resistance from product owners as well, are some real challenges of these legacy systems. Whereas on the other hand, we have seen that cloud native solutions are elastic in nature, they are quickly deployable, easily manageable, and then they are highly resilient. So they also have low utilization and thus are cost effective. Since they have low utilization, so they are cost effective. And sometimes the initial cost seems to be high in such cases, but once the solution is baked on the cloud, the total cost of ownership, including operation, maintenance, everything is proportionally lower. So in managing applications that did not originate in cloud, or the workloads following legacy system consumes more time or are even not scalable. So thus they lead to bad cloud economics. So, yeah.
So Sanjna, there are some parts of FinOps that that benefit from being centralized. What have you seen with kind of doing the centralized approach versus others that may decide to do something like RIs and have different teams manage their own sphere? What's your take on that?
I love this question. I could talk about it all day long.
Me too.
Our cloud business office at VMware, we kind of manage everything centrally. And there's many advantages just purely from a dollar perspective, right? So there's more flexible cost commitments like savings plan and just hourly dollar cuts that you just benefit from buying centrally in a payer perspective. Also, just logistically, it's such a nightmare, right? To manage permissions of who can buy and who can't buy. If you have an intern, you don't want him to just come in and buy a bunch of stuff. And if people leave all the time, you don't know who's the next point of contact. So it can be a little nightmarish when you don't do things centrally. Also, we've seen that when engineering managers are under pressure to save money immediately, and if they are constrained with cost, they will immediately look to RIs because that's an easy way out. But it might not always be the right thing to do. It can be very easy to save costs by just buying a bunch of RIs, but that can lead to might not be well-intentioned. So for all these reasons, we've decided to centrally manage all RIs. When we made that decision, it was a distributed system. A bunch of people had RIs. We had a bunch of RIs. So what we did was we acted like a bank, and we just basically bought all RIs from everyone. And then we have a system in place for how we deal with unused RIs, how we buy and approve RIs. So we have a system in place. What we do is, during our team also runs the chargeback process. What we do unique to VMware is we process this thing called equitable chargeback, where we take the benefit of all of these discounts that we have that are bought centrally and distribute it equitably and proportionally depending on people's costs. This solves multiple problems. People don't have to go into the CUR. I saw someone else said that you have to be a data scientist to basically, or get a PhD in the CUR. It is true, it's just really complicated. We don't want people to have to deal with that. Also, there's dozens of ways you can, of permutations and combinations of all these cost commitments across 3 clouds, and we are a multi-cloud company. So we don't want to have our engineers or our engineering managers waste time in having to learn the ins and outs of what is the right thing to do. So we kind of abstract that layer, and we act as a bank, as a consulting service. And since we own the chargeback process as well, it becomes easier to it just makes sense to own that process end to end.
Awesome. Love it. Yeah, that's the topic I could talk about for hours. Fortunately, we don't have that amount of time. We're at time. Thank you so much to each of our panelists, and everyone stick around. We're going to be in a breakout room and you can ask any questions. We'll keep the discussion going. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Riley, and all the panelists. I was actually slacking Riley along the way, like, oh, that's good. Let's talk more about this or not. But there's so many things in there. I actually want to dip into the breakout, and Sanjna, one of the things you talked about was recommendations and how you're managing those. And I felt like this theme kept coming up for me, that was like, well, when do we move past recommendations that you have to make to those teams having culturally instilled leadership driven, goals where they're sort of finding their own inefficiencies? And it'd be interesting to explore that when we get to the breakout, but that's what that's for. Excellent. So moving forward, because time and all the things. Next thing we wanted to highlight is, of course, the oddly good FinOps pod. podcast. One of our favorite episodes is with Kim Wier, who's on this call today, talking about FinOps' product, if you want to dig more into that. Joe Daly and team are doing a bunch of work here to pull together sort of longer tail of stories, the more than we can do necessarily on these calls. So both like, yes, go check it out, but also if you want to be on the podcast, reach out to Joe. We'd love to get you plugged in. Joe does keep very strict creative controls, so he may say no, but we don't really know what he bases it on. Anything to add, Joe?
No, that's great. The
All
Kim episode's fantastic. If you really like, go listen to it. Like, stick with it through all the way, because there's points all throughout the episode that are just fantastic.
Also great shirt, Joe. JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.